Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, first we've got an approval of the memorandum of the September 16th, 2019 regular meeting. A copy has been posted. I will go ahead and make a motion to approve. Second from Councilor Spies. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? The memorandum of the September 16, 2019 regular town council meeting is approved by a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Next, we have departmental monthly reports. Reports are submitted by town management staff for council review and posted on the town website. Councilors, any questions? We got those last week for any staff members. Okay. Next, and the highlight of this meeting is the swearing in of our new firefighters, Chief Van Gorder and Mayor Hawk.
Mr. President, if I could, with your approval, I'd like to deviate from the agenda, if I could, briefly, and ask that Jeanette, Tim, and their two sons, Noah and Alex, would please come forward, the White family, as they have a presentation for the town of Zionsville.
Please, and welcome it.
Good evening. My name is Jeanette White, and this is my husband, Tim, and our two boys, Nolan and Alex. I want to thank Chief Van Gorder for inviting us to speak tonight. We are really pleased to be here to provide a donation to the Zionsville Fire Department in the memory of my brother, Kevin Sanders. Kevin was 33, a teacher, a new dad, and a volunteer firefighter in a small town in Central Texas. The evening of April 17th, 2013, Kevin was taking his EMT Basics final in the city of West Texas. During the exam, the radio call went out that fire assistance backup was needed for a fire at the local fertilizer plant. Kevin answered the call, and 15 minutes later, about 10 tons of ammonium nitrate exploded, and 12 first responders, including my brother, were killed. You go through so many emotions: anger, regret, and horrible, deep sadness. But through this despair, we experience the beauty and generosity of the human spirit. We cannot begin to repay the kindness and support provided to our family after Kevin's death, but we can support the organizations that supported us. Please recognize the Texas Line of Duty Death Task Force and the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation for the work they do for survivor families. We would not have made it through without our Texas LODD Honor Guard liaison, Captain Jamie Schippeler, who's become part and will always be part of our family. And we're here today to recognize the importance of our local fire department that supports us and keeps us safe every day. We remember Kevin today for his generous spirit, his love of animals, and his awesome slip and slide skills. Uncle Kevin's memory, please accept this $1,000 donation for the department's safety equipment enhancements and these challenge coins. Chief Van Gorder, we'd like to thank you for your leadership of the Zionsville Fire Department. Thank you to all of the current and new Zionsville firefighters here tonight for protecting our community. And thank you to all of your families for the unconditional love and support you have and will give to your firefighters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would now at this time ask that Chris Kelly, Benjamin Sherclough, Alex White, and Jarrett Vardaman please come forward with your significant others. And Mr. Mayor Hawk, if you would please present the oath of office once they're ready.
Hey.
save that a lot later. Okay. For those of you taking the oath, will you raise your right hand, please? I state your name. Do solemnly swear. That I will support the Constitution of the United States of America. The Constitution of the State of Indiana. And the ordinances of the town of Zionsville, Indiana. I will faithfully, honestly, and impartially discharge all my official duties of the office of firefighter for the town of Zionsville, regardless of the race, creed, color, religion, sex, or national origin of the persons I serve, so help me God. Congratulations.
Firefighters are released. The firefighters can go around and shake hands. Well, they're shaking hands with the council. If those are our 4 new firefighters. We also recently had 2 merit promotions to the rank of lieutenant. So if Casey Curtis and Aaron Gibbons would please come forward with their significant other, receive their oath of office for the rank of lieutenant.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America. The Constitution of the State of Indiana. And the ordinances of the town of Zionsville, Indiana. I will faithfully, honestly, and impartially discharge all my official duties of the office of lieutenant for the town of Zionsville, regardless of the race, creed, color, religion, sex, or national origin of the persons I serve, so help me God.
Thank you, lieutenants. And the last swearing in we have this evening, if Scott Mamrell would please come forward with his significant other. Scott is our newly appointed battalion chief, and he'll have his oath of office.
solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America,
the Constitution of the State of Indiana,
the Constitution of the State of Indiana,
and the ordinances of the town of Zionsville, Indiana.
and the ordinances of the town of Zionsville, Indiana.
I will faithfully, honestly, and impartially
I will faithfully, honestly, and impartially
discharge all my official duties
discharge all of my official duties
of the office of Battalion Chief for the town of Zionsville,
of the office of Battalion Chief for the town of Zionsville,
regardless of the race, creed, color,
regardless of the race, creed, or color,
religion, sex, or national origin
religion, sex, or national origin,
of the persons I serve, so help me God.
of the person I serve, so help me God.
Thank you, Mayor Hawk. Thank you, Mr. President. And with your approval, we'll go ahead and release the firefighters.
Not yet.
Oh, sorry.
It came to my attention that, and one sec, got to shake a hand, and I'm going to tell you something. You did not tell me this, but I found this out, and I never miss a chance to embarrass you, that at the Indiana Emergency Response Conference Awards Banquet, you were named the Fire Chief of the Year for career, and the Zionsville firefighter paramedic Abdullah Abimslimov Dooley received Paramedic of the Year. So congratulations. Now you can go. So on that note, if you were here for, oh, sorry.
I was just going
Oh, please.
That's what I was going to say.
Oh, yeah. So unless you want to stick around for 2 hours of bond hearings, which might be kind of exciting, if you're here for the firefighter swearing in, we'll break for a couple of minutes, let you guys go and celebrate with your loved ones in the lobby. Thank you.
I know.
Oh, I'm impressed. I have a tendency to do that. Riveting, I'm sorry. I should have sold it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll wait till they shut the door. Is it going here a second?
Riveting.
Yeah, I guess.
It may have happened.
You can move up if you'd like. On your own.
We lost the left side, but that's okay. So now we're on to request to speak. I have one request to speak, Mr. Michael Howard. Mr. Howard, if you want, I can wait until your agenda item is up, or you can speak now. Your choice. I'll wait. You'll wait? Okay, very good. Now on to old business. First, we've got a presentation by the Parks and Streets and Stormwater Department. This is by Mayor Hawk, Mr. Lance, Mr. Dickey, and Chief Knox. This is about the proposed street stormwater building lease and park district bonds 2019 A, B, and C on our agenda. Mayor Hawk?
Thank you, President Garrett and members of the council. I thought we'd kind of kick off the presentation fresh again. I think one of the questions we heard was why the need and why now? And I think over the next, hopefully not a couple hours, but next presenters, they will help you identify the need that is before us between the police, the parks, and the street and stormwater department. And then Tim Berry from Crow will help us with the financial presentation that should help us with the why now portion. You recall that approximately 3 years ago, the town agreed to purchase the former Rail Trail Gardens property. Those 15 acres joined the 10 acres that the town currently owned, now make up this proposed campus. Along with town partners from CSO Architects, HWC Engineering, Rundell Ernstberger, a space needs study was completed for each department. That involved staff and other experts. It not only evaluated the current office space and meeting space, as well as the space for equipment and asset storage, but also the needed space for growth over the next 25 years. It was quickly determined that the current municipal facilities complex was inadequate for today's needs and could not be expanded upon. This plan before you tonight accommodates today's needs, but also allows for growth over the next 25 years, hence the campus concept. It is also master planned for that future expansion. To lead the discussion about the current needs, you're going to hear from Street and Stormwater Superintendent Lance, Parks Director Dickey, Parks Board President Jeff Edmondson, and then as well as Police Chief Knox. Following them will be Tim Berry from Crow, and will lead you through the financial discussions.
Thank you, Amanda, and good evening. I will kick off some of the specifics to the discussion this evening. I'm going to here specifically begin to address what are items A and B under your old business agenda, which is the Zionsville Municipal Building Corporation lease rental revenue bonds of 2019. Obviously, the purpose being to fund the construction of our portion of a municipal complex that would house both the Parks and Recreation Department, as well as the public spaces and public amenities there, as well as the Streets and Stormwater Department's offices and operations. Briefly, this is a 20-year bond being considered. The face value is $9.1 million for the construction costs, and there's a breakdown there. This makes more sense if I align the slides with what I'm actually talking about. And a breakdown of the costs there. Obviously there are many more things in a building when it goes into site development. This is just a conversion of empty fields and space, and so there are site development costs that would be expected from any type of development, private or public. So looking at our current facility and some limitations we currently encounter, some typical examples, and it's difficult to just bullet point a few of these things and show a few pictures to really portray the overall picture. But as an idea, we currently have 3 employees who share one workstation and computer. We've had to put a workstation in our break room, which is a computer that's shared by many employees, mostly for time tracking purposes. One very limiting factor for us is we have a single conference room that's very small and only seats about 6 people. That's barely enough room for our weekly staff meetings when we get together once a week, and we certainly can't host any meetings of any size, and that results in us making frequent trips to town hall when we need the space to hold a larger meeting, typically related to projects. And because our space was not really efficiently designed initially, obviously we build things, we review things. We don't have any layout space. We work with large prints, large plans, large rollouts, and 3 of our employees, myself included, need ample opportunity to spread things out and get workspace. And you'll see from a few pictures, we just simply don't have that kind of space available to us. Obviously, I mentioned before some equipment constraints. We currently have equipment stored off-site, which slows our operations as we retrieve equipment. It degrades the equipment, not protecting it from the elements, and of course anything off-site, unsecured, outside is a security risk. I've talked quite a bit about salt barns, so I'll skip that. Just as an overall assessment of our current facility, we're in a 20-year-old building housing 3, arguably 4 departments. Our portion of that building at the time it was built was designed around a staff of 6 full-time employees. We had approximately 10 vehicles, and less than 25 pieces of equipment. Currently, we are at 16 full-time employees and growing, including 4 positions that are office staff positions that just simply did not exist at the time of our building's construction. We're up to over 28 vehicles and over 50 pieces of unique equipment to protect and maintain. Our shared portion of our shared building includes 2 offices only and 2 file storage rooms and an administrative office reception area. In order to fit 6 of our office staff into these 2 office spaces, we've converted all storage rooms to dual-purpose file storage and office space. And we've doubled up in an office, which presents unique challenges in the fact that these people are about 5 feet apart, they're on the phone frequently, and it makes conversations quite cumbersome often. These are just a few quick pictures that are symptomatic of our struggles. You can see in the upper left, we have no space. Everything doubles as storage as well as workspace. That's actually 2 little workstations there, one slightly larger than a TV tray. To the right then is our equipment that's outside unprotected. We have an inefficient use of space because we do need to store equipment to protect it from the elements. So we have things like plows that could be stored in a different type of facility that are taking up our operational space. And then we have some small bins which are inadequate for the salts, or excuse me, for the sand, the gravel, the sod, dirt, those types of things that we use in our project. I will point out in that lower right-hand picture that directly behind that less than aesthetically appealing storage facility is one of our trail corridors through the town. So some options that obviously should be considered anytime we're considering a new facility is the no-build option. And I hope that what you hear tonight precludes the no-build option as simply not viable for the expansion and growth of our facilities, be it ours, the police, or the Parks and Rec. We simply cannot support more staff at this time. The staffing positions we look to add, we've actually deferred 2 that were planned for next year because of some space limitations. These are office staff. They need workstations. We don't have workstations. We're going to have people stacked on top of stacked people making phone calls directly next to each other. Inadequate salt supply keeps cropping up. I didn't put this together, but I'm happy it was in there twice. And one interesting fact is we currently have 14 dedicated non-public parking spaces for over 21 full-time employees. My employees park on the grass, in the gravel, anywhere that they can find. So what about expanding our current site? Currently, we simply just don't have the space to be able to provide the kind of expansions that would be necessary for 1, let alone 3 departments. Beyond that, we have not explored this fully, but we may be at lot coverage maximum issues for our drainage capacities as well as zoning ordinances. And we are nestled within some dense land uses. We are directly adjacent to a multifamily unit right next door to us on one side, and on the other 2 sides are single family. To expand our operations, we're often 24 hours a day and we're often noisy. I don't think that would be well received by the community that sits directly adjacent to us and sometimes within a couple of 100 feet of proximity. And certainly, there is not the possibility to expand all 3 facilities on site. That would result in a cobbled together amalgamation of buildings that might serve a purpose for a couple of years, but at the inevitable time, when we must have remote facilities, it'll be very expensive. We will have wasted the effort because that stuff will have to be torn down, repurposed, because the police department's not looking to move into warehouses, building storage. They need their office spaces. So the space needs are different among the departments. It has been mentioned about some space at Town Hall, certainly a viable option for administration and some of those staffing levels. However, clearly that does not accommodate any of our equipment needs, our adding to our fleet, as well as maintenance and storage. Operationally, it would be very challenging to remove the administration and the office staff from the field staff in our department. We work together face-to-face on a daily basis, multiple times a day. Often problems in the field are brought right back in where we must immediately discuss things, view things, go over things together in order to seek quick resolution. And I think that goes without saying that there will be a decrease in operational efficiencies. Although I speak of office staff and field staff, all of my staff, myself included, spends a great amount of time in the field. If we were located in a more professional setting, such as a town hall, Most of my staff would be dragging mud, dirt, grease, and grime in on a daily basis, as well as bringing large pieces of equipment in as they check in with me or their supervisors who may be housed in this building. Finally, an option that's always to be considered is a partial build at a remote location or a phasing in of a project. Taking a look at this with the site that the town has acquired, it was determined to be not fiscally advantageous to take this approach due to a large amount of the costs that are involved in site development. We couldn't just stick a couple of buildings in on a field without the supporting infrastructure, the hard surfaces, the working areas, at least minimal utilities run to the facility. So considering a master plan, if you will, of the campus concept that's been developed, these things would be very remotely located deep within the site. All the driveways, parking area, water, utilities would have to be brought into the site. So you're still going to be looking at a couple of $1 million, I would imagine, in need just to start the basis or foundation for a remote site, which of course would lend itself more than likely to 2 financing rounds for this, not likely to have cash for each operation or for each expansion. So then you're doubling your issuance costs, your soft costs, et cetera. We'll get off that slide. So at this point, I think I will turn this over to Superintendent Dickey, and he and I will be up here jointly for a while to take us through the next discussions.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you, Council. Similarly, I can try and keep it quick, but partially I can say ditto. We have sort of the small brothers of the street department. We don't get out on the streets as much as they do. They don't get out in the wooded trail pieces as much as we do. And we don't have quite as big of equipment, but we have about about an eighth, of their back storage area on the southwest corner is used for our facilities. We'll have some slides coming up here shortly that show some of that. We utilize some of their bulk storage, as you mentioned, or we utilize some of the material from their bulk storage. As he mentioned, they need some larger space. So we'll use some of the stuff that meets us, but there's some stuff that they utilize that we don't, and we have some things that we'd like to utilize that we don't have a space for at all. For example, the crushed aggregate that you see at Zion Nature Sanctuary or on the South Rail Trail. That's not a type of material they need at all. It's not a thing we store currently, or landscaping bed mulching. It's not a thing that we store currently at all because we don't have the space here. So the campus envisioned having an area for our type of storage as well. I'm sure Lance and we will still continue to cooperate. They're not going to be very far down the road if you do agree to build this place, so they're just in the back part. So we'll be going back and forth and borrowing their backhoes and some of the bigger equipment just as we do now. But we'd have some area for storage. We're going to get to a slide here in a minute that shows our stockade and stool storage areas and our break room. As you mentioned, we share a break room on our side for lunches and stuff, and with their staff, it's pretty well booked out during certain times. We can try and cycle in and out in different times on that, and in the microwave and those sort of things are tough to use. And we'll show you some pictures of some barns that we utilize currently. So, oops, stuttered on the button there. So similarly, we have 2 offices in our portion of the wing, the west wing that Lance and we and the streets and stormwater share. And those spaces are on the order of about 150 square feet each, kind of an average between them. And then in addition, we've converted our records room, as you can see in the top left there, into a storage room. We have a part-time administrative support person we do have in the budget this year to go for full-time, but similar to Lance, we're on a very small desk area, and we don't really want to bring in a full-time person on the workstation unless we absolutely have to into this area. As you can see, we have office storage in this area as well, and what you don't see at this particular time, but we also will occasionally put an intern in the back corner of that room as well on a regular table, and IT will set up a computer for us during those windows of time. We've had 3 or 4 perhaps in the 10 years I've been here when the intern kind of fits the right thing that we need, and we're certainly not averse to doing that, but it's not something we necessarily do every summer or season, but we do have had them in there. The upper right picture is a picture of the 8x10 storage area that we have on our current wing. As you can see, we have some flat file storage for plans there. And there were actually 2 photos, one coming outwards, but it shows behind the door there are things stored as well, things like the exhibit that we take to Fall Festival and set up, those sorts of things. a hand truck to take things out, a small cabinet in the corner with office supplies and things like that. Inside, you can see some storage barns that have been in existence since well before I was here at Starkey Park, which they're still used for the type of equipment, off-site storage that we don't necessarily get to every day. But if we, for example, we just recently placed another dog station, litter bag station, and that came from this storage area out to its location. So, but these are getting older and older. They've been re-roofed at least once since I've been here, probably more times than that total, but in any case. This is, as I mentioned, kind of the first picture on the left is the back portion of the whole storage area that's under and conditioned in the sense that it doesn't get to freezing. It's, not going to be 80 degrees in there in the wintertime, or even maybe make 60 maybe. We're standing up on a ladder so you can kind of get an idea, but we're looking from our tool stockade inside the fence where there's, as you can see, numerous hand tools and a lot on the ground and stuff that you can't really see from this photo. We had photos like that, but there's only so many we want to put in. If you can look down the left side here, the white larger vehicle is the street sweeper. So that marks kind of the demarcation between what we have on our side. And because of the lens, it's a little sort of misleading in terms of space. It's not quite as long as what you think. But there are, you can see the green trucks there that are parked at our maintenance staff, our field maintenance staff, which through your folks and Mayor Hawk's support, we did get one more this year in the budget process, and that person's on board, and that truck is parked there as well. And then over on the right-hand side, you can see it's actually could be seen through the stockade fence if you kind of knew what to look for, but there's a desk that our people salvage from the heavy trash pickup that the street department does. And that's used as our alternate break room lunch area when the other one's full. And our maintenance staff meets there in the mornings too, and in the afternoons to finish up, projects. And I believe the next then goes to.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this evening. Like I said at the last meeting of the council here, Zionsville Police Department, we're maxed out. Any of you folks that's been over and see our facilities, I think you would absolutely agree that just no place to put anything. I'm trying to just be blunt with you. You can see here just some of the pictures that we have. We've got certainly, this is the top left picture. That's our forensic laboratory that actually we have to store things in workspaces on countertops. And that's no good, folks. It's just not good. You'll see we have on the right top there, we have some of our vehicles stored outside. And one of the vehicles you do not see there is the new crime scene response vehicle that we're very proud of, and that vehicle has to last the Zionsville Police Department, and it should. But being out in the elements, it's just not a good plan. The bottom left, you'll see the fuming chamber. Maybe you've seen CSI, and that there's the super glue fuming chamber that lifts prints and stuff like that. Not to bore you with those details, but we're actually have to store supplies in this cabinet. Our meeting training room down there, the capacity's 20, crowded. It's crowded. If anybody's been through our Citizens Academy, 20 people, they're elbow to elbow in there. And we try to utilize that as a training room, and with 38, authorized 38 sworn officers, full time, we can't use it as training if we have more than probably 10 people in there training, especially if it's any kind of physical tactics. And if we get any additional staff, certainly clerical or civilian staff, I'm going to have to try to find some place for desk space, and I'm liable to probably have to cut that room down even further. You'll see, it's embarrassing to show this. A storage room there on the left-hand side, no place to put that stuff. When we first had the building constructed 20 years ago, the photo at the top right, that was the officer's report room, and you can see now we're having to store files and equipment and supplies in there. And the bottom right, it says empty desk for storage. Well, that desk is actually occupied by a lieutenant. That's his workspace. And that lieutenant happens to be in charge of our fleet and several other assignments that he's in charge of. So it's, for the efficiency of operation, it's problematic. And I think that's it for just a short synopsis of the police department, but I'm just asking, something's got to give.
Thank you. I know that pictures and, like I said, bullet points can't regularly convey the conditions, but we encourage anybody, anytime you have questions, want to see our operations, we love showing it off. Even though it's cramped and tight, we're still proud of what we do. So we've heard a little bit about the challenges that are faced by each of the three departments occupying the building now. So I'd like to start off a little bit now with what's proposed as part of this funding, if you would ever see fit to approve it. Basically, for the Streets and Stormwater Department, we are replicating what we have now. We've done an operational analysis with CSO. We like the flow, the general flow of our buildings and our spaces. They're provided some professional input on how to improve flow internally and recognize some efficiencies of operations through locations of equipment and interactions. But we're really replicating what we have as far as our facility amenities, and then supplementing with additional capacities, both for what we need now as well as into the future. And we are looking at a 25-year plus design build on this building. And each of the buildings, the main buildings, the heated storage, and the office building, as well as the outside spaces, were all laid out and designed with expansion in mind. So this is a site, although we may say that this building has a 25-year capacity. Again, I mentioned earlier, in the last 18 years, we've tripled in staff size. So looking at that 25-year horizon, this building is almost plug and play for both heated storage, operational space, as well as office space in the future when needs arise. It is composed of an office building with an attached heated workspace, and then a pole barn and a salt barn. Now, a couple of things that are new that we don't currently enjoy were a wash bay and a service bay. A service bay is a huge benefit for us. Right now, we have two choices. We can locate a piece of equipment that needs servicing in-house very far away from where the tools are stored, resulting in lots of time and trips. Or we can park it right in the middle of our operations and make everything else have to go around these trucks or these inoperable equipments. So we're incorporating a service bay and a wash bay into the new facility, which we don't currently enjoy. One thing I would point out, that our current heated workspace, I believe, is about 18,000 feet. We're actually reducing that footprint with this new facility down to around 11 to 12,000 square feet. The building we have right now is very inefficient. The new building is a straight pull through. Our building right now, you pull in and you have to do a left hand or a right hand or a 90-degree turn to get out. So you're losing maneuvering space because straight lines are easy. The minute you start throwing corners into things, it creates these awkward, unusable spaces. So we're able to achieve the same or better efficiencies with a smaller building. In addition, CSO designed the space based on an inventory of our equipment, based on their sizes that they are now, and anticipated what we will purchase. So instead of building a building and figuring out how you're going to use the space, they quantified the space first and then dimensioned the building to fit those needs. And of course, the reduction in size will be offset by a very inexpensive detached 5,000 square foot pole barn facility that's not climate controlled. To touch briefly on the financing, as mentioned earlier, not everything is about buildings, but of the 9.1 issuance for construction costs in this particular bond series, $4 million is dedicated for the construction of the 4 buildings that we're proposing now. Then about $280,000, could count the zeros there, $280,000 for equipping. We will be leaving the police department with what we hope is close to a turnkey operation. We have desks, we have storage, we have files. They'll be able to hopefully move into that space, rearrange that as they need it, but that means we can't pick it up and take it with us, so we will be having to get furniture and equipment, IT needs, et cetera, for the new building. The remainder, of course, are for the development costs to make the site ready and supportive of the uses, including paying off the land contract that the county is currently paying on. One interesting element, which I believe I touched on earlier, is the selection of the Big 4 rail trail corridor to supply this facility with the private town-owned fiber to connect into our network. This has some great opportunities in the future, both for public amenities as far as Wi-Fi hotspots into and among and within the park systems. And also, we have a very linear park. Areas are isolated and safety is always a concern, and having fiber optic along this corridor, should the public safety agencies decide to pursue this in the future, would provide the framework for safety stations, security stations, or possibly even cameras within our network. Finally, I do mention, as Matt had said, the development costs of this site are shared between the bond series. There are building costs and things specific to this department and to that department, but there are common things like driveways, detention ponds, retainage infrastructure that are shared. Those are split among the two bonds and therefore split among the departments.
Continuing the tag team, as Lance was mentioning, there is a shared component to this campus, and the Series A bond that you heard about and the Park Board is talking about is related to the campus itself. As you can see, the total is there for a little over $9 million. And similarly to the scenario that Lance talked about, some of that is site construction that we're sharing on site, demolition of some of the existing structures, which are mostly on the park piece for the most part. And then about $6 million would be the building piece of that. Now, so the types of things that you can see down there that Amanda put this nice slideshow together, but you can see these things that are talked about. I need to press something. Okay, sorry. So you can see the list of things in there, but I'll go on to speak about it a little bit more. You're effectively getting about 8 to 10 acres of a specialized park with this $9 million. There'll be an educational classroom shelter based that there'll be the teaching amphitheater there if it's built and you folks decide to approve it anyway. A trailhead restroom, some reforestation, some prairie wildflower areas similar to what we do with those at other parks. You've seen those. Those do not take as much maintenance as turf grass once they're established. They're also used as part of our stormwater system. For example, at Heritage Trail Park, we avoided the need, the park board avoided the need to have a large basin to treat its stormwater, like a pond or something, and have those floral and planted areas to do that and treat their stormwater both in quantity and quality. So that's Lance's, sorry. I went a little farther. But in any case, those are the types of things that would be going on in this facility. And as we said, some shared construction costs, some shared getting utilities to the site, but they're split basically based upon the usage in each piece. Now we're ready for it.
So to kind of wrap up my direct participation in this, and sort of we have questions later, this is a pretty spot-on accurate, but still conceptual design for the campus, although this is probably about 99% where we would be. I'll draw your attention to the two larger buildings sort of in the upper right-hand area of the frame. That brownish building is the office, and then that building that is kind of attached there at the corner is our heated operational space. So that is part of phase one, and you can see to the left of the brown building, that is anticipated future office space if and when the town needs to add on to that building. And the same with the heated operational space that can be expanded back away from you in this particular frame. Then you'll see one lighter building back there, which is the approximately 5,000 square foot pole barn type structure. And then back in the far upper left corner is our salt facility. So this is what the layout of the campus would look like. As Matt mentioned earlier, the areas down here in the left where it looks to be a truck backed up to some bulk storage areas, I'm very glad that we found a piece of property that ultimately, when this occurs, that the operations and maintenances portions of the departments can co-locate at the same place. As Matt mentioned, we have equipment in our facility that they can benefit from the occasional use of, and likewise for us. So it is a rather harmonious existence, and we enjoy the assets that the others has for our disposal. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to Matt. We'll wrap up this portion of the presentation, I believe.
Thank you. Before I flip from this slide, this is looking back kind of to the west, maybe slightly north of west. And off the screen in here, when I'm getting ready to flip to some of them, but would be some of the park portions. Our maintenance storage areas would be over here to the left of that. Those are our storage basins you can see inside the fence, or storage bins inside the fence, and theirs are farther back along the side there. But we would be off to the left of this with our maintenance structures. And again, like Lance talked about, benefiting from the experience that we've had and that Lance has had, and then working with CSO, they'll be pulled through. They're designed in such a way that we'll have conditioned space, but have room to expand, potentially first with unconditioned space, maybe 3 walls with the front off of it, and then later could make those conditioned, perhaps years later, depending on, the type of use and equipment. So there's space on that to fill out, and there's spaces on the park nature center portion that'll be over here, which is the nature center, of course, the kind of the jewel of this new park if it is implemented. So here you can see how a conceptual of the entrance for our piece. There would be a separate entrance to the south of this location to get to the street department portion because of the different size trucks and things going on there. This would be off 875 East, south of the current rail trail crossing. So you can see that you would wind in, and we would be reforesting the old farm field on the front. There are some trees that we would try and save as well on the front that exist, certain species. And then these are some of the things that I mentioned. This is looking kind of to the north and west again, and you're basically at this point over the nature center looking outward. A restroom, trailhead restroom there with the big 4 emblem on it, as you kind of see small 4. And then a outdoor classroom, shelter, which we've used effectively in other parks. This would not necessarily be considered for regular picnicking or those sort of shelters. We have those in other locations. The proposed amphitheater that's there, walking trails through here, through this park itself, educational opportunities with interpretive signage, the prairie plantings, the biobasins, which will be needed for stormwater treatment anyways. So those sorts of things, unless you wanted to just have a big old retainage pond. So here's some more photos. Some of the advantages that this does for us is, as you've heard in the last presentation, our nature center currently is basically less than 2,500 square public feet. And it's all broken up in a lot of different areas. It's been expanded 3 different times. It was an old home originally by the superintendent of schools for a while, then used by the schools for office space. As you heard last time, it belongs to the schools. They've been gracious to let us use it for our rental payment of effectively keeping the building up. We've roofed it a couple times. It's getting ready to about need windows again, and probably a roof again before too long. So that's kind of our rental payment of it. But one of the limitations is, from the school usage point of view, and it's certainly understandable, it's always been in place, but during the school year, we have limited access except on weekends, so because of the school functions and things going on. During the summer, we certainly can do more programming on site, and even during some of the breaks, like fall break and spring break, we kind of beef up the programming a little bit, and Christmas break, we do some things in there. But, and we still see about 12 to 15,000 people a year in terms of park programming in that facility, but it's very cramped. The main program room holds about 25 people auditorium style, maybe 30 if you have tables in there, if you're doing crafts with the kids or something, that cuts it way down. The animal rooms are in there and stuff. So the nature center is envisioned, which you can see in the lower left would be the much larger section there. The center section that has the sort of black roof line would be the atrium between the two. It'd be where you could have a whole group of a couple classes sort of stage into the, like one might go out into the park itself for tours with some of part-time staff, and some might go into the nature center itself, moving through. It could also be information for someone just coming into the park that maybe doesn't necessarily want to go to the nature center, but wants to plan what they're doing. So we'd have park maps and things, both of the whole system and of the park right here itself. So how they might move and flow around the current facility. And then the smaller square over on the left would be the park offices portion. It is again designed modularly so that on the line, if the 25-year lifespan comes up in 25 years, then you could expand it to the west there. Similar, there's spaces for the nature center to be expanded upon as well. The nature center programming room is designed conceptually, at least by CSO, to be dividable in half and expandable, so we could run 2 birthday parties at the same time, or a birthday party that we do now with, say, a program on one side. And this leaves the center itself still functioning for those to come in and flow through and educate themselves or be led through on a program, which when we do a birthday party at the current center, pretty well that kind of spreads out from that 30 person room at best into the areas and kind of the nature center almost de facto shuts down when that goes on. Those rooms can also be used for other things besides, environmental programs. So used for educational programming or senior programming or just a variety of things in having the space. And then there is the space, that could be expandable for office space and our own dedicated. Right now we work with Lance's administrative assistants. They pass through that person to come through, but sometimes when she's at lunch, there's no one available and those sort of things. So space for workshops and things in there, crafts and building things inside the center, and storage as well that would be easily accessible. Currently, our only storage is an attic, a couple of attic rooms and a basement room down or up steep stairs. All right, and now it's time for the fiscal side of things.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the council. I'm Tim Berry with Crow, and here to go over some of the concerns that I heard from the last several meetings and answer some of those questions as we go through the presentation here. We're going to first start off with talking about the debt today. Some of the questions I heard with respect to what is your debt compared to and your tax rate as it compares to other communities here regionally, and how it compares with when you each were elected to the council in 2011 and 2015. We're also going to talk a little bit about why and why now. You heard the needs, but we're going to talk from a funding standpoint as to why it might make sense to do these projects at this point in time. And through that process, if at any point in time you have some questions, please feel free to ask those. We're going to start off with really an overview of the debt today, your property tax rates, and where you stand with respect to other neighboring communities. We're going to look at your debt, and your debt really is composed of two functions. You have your fee and your TIF-based debt, which is about 50% of the debt that this town has today. And then your property tax, and we've also included in there your annual appropriation. So today, that is about 50% in each of those classifications. There. Let's focus, though, on your property tax and appropriation debt, because that's what we're really talking about today, and where those dollars are coming from, and when those dollars are expected to be paid off. We're going to talk here about the park. You will be paying off in January of 2022. That remaining balance that is left on the park bonds of $1.2 million. At the same time, you are going to be paying off dollars here in January of next year on 4 other bonds associated with the town. A question that I heard from several of you at last council meeting was just what is our tax rate compared today, and what is the impact of the tax rate if we were to approve these bonds, expected impact of the tax rate if we were to approve those bonds, and how does that relate to when the council was elected in 2015, and for some of you in 2011. What you will see is your tax rate for both debt and overall tax rate today is less than what the tax rate for the town was in both 2015 as well as 2016. You're approximately 5 cents cheaper today than you were for the tax rate at the election of 2015. And you're also about 5 cents cheaper than what that tax rate was when you first were elected in 2000, or when you first took office in 2016. This also compares favorably with what the tax rate was in 2011 and 12, where the town rate was just over 60 cents per hundred of assessed valuation, and your debt rate was 18.65 cents of cents per $100 of assessed valuation. You will see some variation, and you may question that variation in that Zionsville town debt rate column. One of the reasons is because you have afforded good stewardship of the dollars that you have received, and instead of assessing tax rates for all of the debt capacity, you have utilized, through the appropriation of your budget, miscellaneous revenues that have come in, and utilize those for debt service payments instead of adding that to your debt levy within those tax rates. And so that is why that rate fluctuates some from year to year. You will see, though, that on average, that debt service rate is right at 15 cents, which compares equal to what you are proposing should you approve these tax rates or these bonds for both 2020, 2021, into 2022, and in 2023. And you will see that that rate will continue to go down at that point in time because of further debt that will be paid off at that time. The other question I heard was, how do you compare to other communities? Communities here in Boone County, communities in neighboring counties of Hamilton and Hendricks, as well as some larger communities beyond. You will see that your tax rate, with the exception of the town of Avon, with the city of Avon, your tax rate is less than every other community within this mix. What we have shown is the total municipal tax rate, the rate that you have control over, as well as the total tax rate that the taxpayers would receive. And while there are differing tax rates within every community, what we have used is the main tax rate for each of those communities. You have the second lowest overall tax rate of all of the communities, as well as the second lowest municipal tax rate, which you can control. You are nearly 8 cents less than Danville, which is the next closest, 10 cents cheaper than Fishers, nearly 20 cents less than Carmel, Westfield, and Plainfield, 23 less than Lebanon, 33 less than West Lafayette, 34 less than Brownsburg, 46 less than Noblesville, 50 less than Lafayette, and you'll see the rate of Whitestown is more than double, as well as the rate for Lafayette, or for Kokomo, are more than double what your town rate is. So your rates compare very favorably, and your rates today are very favorable to where they were 4 years ago and 8 years ago as well. As well, the impact of this debt would not have a negative impact on those rates. And you may question that and say, why is that? And really, it's largely due to the fact that your assessed value was approximately a third of what it is today when most of those bonds were issued. In fact, when you look at the park bonds of that were issued in 2007, that $5.9 million in park debt equates to about the same amount when you compare it to the percentage of assessed value as the proposed debt for the park district before you today. I also heard, why now? The prognosticators are saying before long we're about to enter into a recession. Why would we want to enter into debt? What impact would that have on tax rates? What impact have we seen on assessed valuations historically during an economic downturn? The economic downturn that we saw most recently, beginning in 7 through 8 and 9, was really one of the first economic downturns in our country's history that saw impact to residential assessed valuations. While most communities across this state saw a reduction in assessed valuation during that period of time, and you did as well, your assessed valuation was minimal compared to what we saw across the rest of the across the rest of the state. Quite frankly, the donut counties around Marion County saw a similar reaction to the assessed valuations as you saw compared to other communities across the state, where in some areas they did see double-digit loss in assessed valuation. What we saw in 2010 and again in 2011 was a reduction of assessed valuation of 1.65% in 2010, 0.26% in 2011, and we've seen consistent growth in assessed valuation since that point in time. It was impossible to look at the effect from 2008 to 2009 due to the reorganization and the impact that had on your assessed valuation, as well as you had some impact due to reorganization in 2015 that distorted that number and that growth during that point in year. But otherwise, you've seen consistent growth in assessed valuation, and what the Boone County assessor has already certified to the Department of Local Government Finance for 2019 taxes due and payable in 2020 is a 5.76 increase in assessed valuation for Zionsville. And that is that 2.858 figure that you see there in that assessed valuation number. We have included that even though we're not billing taxes on it as yet, but that has been certified by the assessor and is what the Department of Local Government Finance will utilize in calculating tax rates for the 2020 tax billing year. So let's take a look first at the Park District and give an overview there. We're going to first look at the debt capacity, the general obligation debt capacity. These bonds, as structured, are proposed to be GO bonds. And according to state law, you have capacity of 2% of 1/3 of the assessed valuation. The town, as well as the Park District, have the same assessed value. Those are two separate calculations that DLGF allows for GO debt capacity within this Park District. Based on the 2018 pay 2019 bonds, you would be able to issue these bonds within that capacity. But I show that 2019 pay 20 column there with that growth in assessed value from the township or from the county assessor would increase your capacity of over $1 million. The question, why now? Well, the reason why now is because projects such as you are proposing and are being proposed take time to build and construct. And you do not pay principal payments on those projects until those projects are completed. We have worked into the bond calculations, capitalized interest, and an interest-only payment through January of 2022. And that happens to be the last time that you would have a principal payment on the 2007 bonds that are currently outstanding. If you were to not issue those bonds today, what you would see is potentially a drop in a tax rate, and then if you were to issue the bonds at a later point in time, then a bump back up of a tax rate at another, in another year. Typically, councils like to look at those numbers so that they are somewhat steady so that the taxpayers are not seeing variation within that tax rate on a ongoing basis. That is one of those reasons why now, with issuing these park bonds.
Tim, on this, if I can interrupt you.
Yeah,
When I looked at this earlier, it looks like the debt service per year is going to be more than 3 times what we're paying now. Is that correct?
that is correct.
And if we didn't do the bonds, then we would have that 18 million or 1.8 million dollars in excess. Is that what I'm understanding? At the current tax rate,
Can you explain what you mean by excess?
at the current tax rate, we would collect $1.8 million more per year.
You would not be able to have that current tax rate. So this is a debt service rate that is there calculated based upon your debt service levy.
So if we didn't do this, then they would lower our tax rate.
That is correct.
Yeah, Kevin, that money doesn't exist, the 1.8 million. It's just, we would save the 547, we wouldn't be paying that anymore, and so we'd have that money available to the community.
But if we
But
didn't
the
get the bonds.
1.8, the 7, the 2.7, and the 3.4,
Right.
that total amount, that's the new debt service.
Actually, the 547 you would not have either, because once those bonds go away in 2022, there would not be a tax levy for debt service within the Park District.
And I want to ask you about that later, because
So there would
all
not
these
be a
taxes are based
tax
on-
levy for that.
There's a couple of questions around that I'd like to ask you to get some clarity on, but we can talk about that.
And while that dollar amount is higher, what you'll see, though, is the assessed valuation there in column 3. The assessed valuation on the outstanding bonds is based on the old town limits of $1.39 billion. Your assessed value for the new bonds would be for the entire town limits of 2.7. So that is why your difference, but why it also does not have an impact on the tax rate later on.
And the 2% of the third, is that 2% just for parks, or is that across the board for the town?
You have a general obligation limit for Park District, as well as a general obligation limit for the town,
So the 2% for the park,
for both.
those are two separate 2%.
Those are two separate 2%. That is correct.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, so let's, just since we're talking about these dollars in the last column. Okay, if the town does not get the $724,000 if we don't pass these bonds, where does that money go? Does somebody keep it? Does the county keep it? Do the taxpayers keep it?
It would be in a reduction of the tax rate
Okay, so,
at that point in
right,
time.
right, so I'm just saying,
So
so
we would not-
if we don't take it, who gets it? Who
It
keeps
would,
it?
it would not be charged to the taxpayer.
Correct, right.
Correct?
But hang on a
difference, though,
second,
is-
because
Yeah, so
at the end of the
I mean,
day,
it's not just dollars that come out of
right,
nowhere, so I'm
but
trying
it's,
to
we're
walk through it.
we're
Walk
still
us
a
through it.
heavily individual home community,
Bedroom
and that's where, bedroom community, that's where our taxes come from, which are capped at 1%.
Correct.
So all
Okay.
this tax rate nonsense is just about shifting around fixed dollars. It's not, we're not raising anybody's out of pocket unless we, because we already charge commercial rental people 2%. We charge 1% to our homeowners, and we charge 2.17 or 2.2 on commercial. So the only additional rate here would be the money we hop onto commercial. That's our only window of opportunity to raise more taxes locally, right? Am I right?
Yes and no.
No, well, explain to me no.
So,
Because I am
so
right.
from the 1%, you're correct. There would not be a reduction in individuals' tax bills because of the 1% property tax cap for homeowners.
Right.
There would be a reallocation of those dollars between taxing units.
Right. Which
That
is what I
would be
just said.
and funds within those taxing units. As it relates to an ability to raise revenues, you get a percentage for those dollars that are capped and over the cap limit. it is based on the rates, and there is an allocation of those rates among differing taxing districts. So if you are a lesser percentage of the rate as a whole, it's not going to, you're going to get a lesser percentage of those dollars that are collected as well.
So which taxing units would then be able to get those dollars? So,
With respect to what?
yeah, so, pardon me? Oh. Oh, so, yeah, I'm just, yeah, just disregard it.
No, I think, no, let me speak for you. If 10 cents is now not going towards debt service and the town is still getting $1, where does the 10 cents go now? Like, does the state keep it? Does the county keep it? Do we get?
Does it go to the
The state does not keep any of your property tax dollars. The dollars are allocated between the county, the town, the schools,
And the library.
and the library. And so there would be a reallocation of those dollars based on the percent of your tax levy compared to the whole on what those dollars would be. So for a homeowner. Now, at the 2% and the 3%, there would be some dollars changed.
So so going upon that, so if we were to reduce our levy, then let's say the school or the libraries could then take that, and then would be difficult for us to then raise it again later on. So that's one of these, okay, I'm understanding that. Thank you.
But the reality is there's no new money. It's just allocation of existing money unless we can raise rates on the commercial property owners. That's the only new money that's available here, or the lit tax.
Or growth in assessed valuation.
And this is where you're,
And growth in assessed valuation allows you additional dollars collected.
I understand that, but
this is where this
I'm
whole
not
formulation
wholly
comes
comfortable with you saying it because you said our valuations tripled from 2008, and really, it's gone up 50%, which is terrific. You used the pre-organization value and then said it tripled, and that's not a very clear, concise statement, but that's your
Your
choice.
assessed value at that point in time that your debt was issued under, you had assessed valuation of right at $1 million. You're about at 2.9 today.
Right, because that was after the reorganization.
That is
We took in
correct.
an extra 40 square miles of dirt, so.
That is correct. But as a result, your capacity is different and your tax rate is calculated differently accordingly. Because the tax levy on the park debt is calculated only on the original town.
I understand that.
Okay.
But I think one of the questions came up last time, and it's the real key thing, because we already have a budget that's more money than we'll be collecting today. That's the proposed budget for 2020. And the question I ask, cash in, cash out, how can we afford an extra $2 million of debt service if we don't have $2 million of additional revenue somewhere? New revenue, new monies, and that wasn't explained last time, maybe you're gonna explain.
Because you would be assessing the tax rate on all of the assessed value that is not being assessed today. The
Fine,
park
just-
bonds, as it relates to the park bonds are being assessed on assessed value, or are being.
We're not just looking at the park bonds, we were looking at $26 million of debt that we had to debt service, and we need to see where all that money comes from, that we're gonna service the debt with. That was the
If you'd
big
allow,
question
I
last time.
can explain that your tax rate today, on this next slide that we have here, is based upon the assessed value of the original limits of the town of Zionsville. That assessed value for 2018 is $1.3 million. Under the proposed debt, you would see that you would not have an assessment of tax until you would be paying a principal payment in 2022. We are estimating that at that point in time, your assessed valuation would be right at $3 million. So when you look at the annual debt service payment today as a function of, as a percentage of the assessed valuation of 1.3 versus the proposed debt service payment with an assessed valuation of $3 million, you have a very comparable tax rate for both of those.
I think what's confusing is if you think about the 1.4 billion today and the 3 billion in 2022, the delta between that, the 1.6 billion that is now going to be assessed, is that not assessed today?
No, it is assessed today. Your assessed value today for 2019 for taxes due and payable in 2022 or in 2020 is right at 2,800,000 or 2,000,000,000.
2.8 billion.
858. Yes.
Right, so
So that is the assessed valuation for the entire town limits,
I think...
of which these bonds would be due and payable from.
Sure. I think to Tom's point earlier, I think all of us are kind of struggling just a little bit in terms of, all right, when this debt service starts, is it coming out of money that's currently budgeted for the Parks Department, for police?
No.
So where's it coming from? That's like, is it coming from the county? Is the library getting less money because we're now sort of sticking our ground, flag in the ground and saying that's now our money?
So your debt service payment comes from a separate debt service levy that the town has. You have a levy for general, for fire, for, well, we'll discuss it here later as you go
Sure.
through your budget, but all of the different areas. You have a separate levy for park district, debt service, as well as general debt service.
I know, but if my personal home is taxed at 1% and we have different rates for different levies, if you increase the bond levy for the debt, you're taking away from something else. I'm struggling with the math with the tax cap, right?
And while you think about that, that's what you would naturally think.
Right.
We're issuing all this debt. What impact is that going to have on the tax rate as a percentage of the Zionsville's rate? If you look at this slide here from earlier, what it shows you is that from 2015 through 2019, on average, your town debt rate has been right at 15 cents. What we are proposing is that with the new debt, your tax rate would continue in that range of 15 cents for each year going forward.
Now, what would happen if, one of the clever things that was done, and you already mentioned it indirectly, was that we took the town hall debt and we made it misappropriations as opposed to debt, and that's how we service it, right? It's not included in this levy calculation, is it?
But it is in your town tax rate for that portion that you pay through a levy.
No, because I thought we paid all our town hall debt as appropriations.
I said
So
your
it's not debt.
appropriation, all your general obligation appropriations are a part of your levy. And then you would decide how much of that is property tax versus how much of that is funded through income taxes today.
But it's not under the
And
debt
miscellaneous
limits that
income.
the state sets based on some earlier slides you had.
It
correct?
is not based on your 2% debt limit. That is correct, but it is within your tax rates today. So you are paying
Well, all
that
of our
rate.
payments are within our tax rate today.
That's correct.
We only get so much money, and again, I think it'll be more.
So what we're
it's nice that
showing
you
here
talk about
is-
rates, but if you're actually saying, well, we're going to take an extra $2 million from the county and keep it ourselves, is that what you're trying to get to here?
No.
Well, then where's the money coming to pay all the 26 million that was proposed here? And I don't know if this is just, if the 1.8 million you showed in debt service was for the $18 million of bonds for the street, stormwater, and park building?
We
or
haven't talked
just
about
the
that.
park?
We're only talking about the parks at this point in time,
Okay,
as I discussed.
all right.
And so, but this shows you here that your tax rate and the percentage of the debt service rate to the town rate has been consistent and would be continue to be consistent. If you remember, I also told you that it's very consistent with that rate from 2011 as well, when the council was first elected.
And is that rate based on the fact that it's more about our tax base mix. In other words, we have a high proportion of residential taxes, and that's why our rate is low relative to
No.
others?
Your rate is not dependent upon each of the classifications. Your rate's dependent upon your total assessed valuation. Does not look at, the rate is not determined by 1%, 2%, and 3% classifications. They look at your total net assessed valuation. So they are not looking at what your 1%, 2%, and 3% classification assessed values are when they calculate your tax rate.
Is that merely residential then?
Pardon me?
Is the assessed value dependent, is it comprehensive, inclusive of the 1, 2, 3s versus?
Your total assessed valuation.
Okay, so it includes commercial and residential.
I think, Suzanne, I think the payment calc is based on whatever our current debt service is relative to our AV. Is that right? Is that what you're trying to say? In other words, if we have X amount of debt service and we charge the taxpayer a percentage, the 0.51 or 0.15, whatever it is you had up there before,
Correct.
then that's just based on the fact that we previously have not over-levered the town. Is that fair? We haven't maximized our borrowing capability according to the state
To assess
regulations. In other words, we don't have $18 million or $17 million of park debt today, so our tax rate on the park debt relative to our total AV is lower because we haven't capped out our borrowing limitations. And again, which don't have anything to do with your ability to service the debt. It's just what the state says, oh, you can borrow up to this amount.
But in 2007, you did cap out your borrowing at that point in time based on the assessed valuation that you had at the time.
Yeah, but back then you could set your own, that was pre-tax caps, wasn't it?
No.
No?
Well, it was pre-tax caps, but
yeah.
you still had the 2% of 1/3 of assessed valuation.
No, but we
Debt
also,
service
the
level.
town also paid, homeowners were paying 2% or whatever in taxes back then. So we were paying twice as much in tax rate.
Could I ask what 2021 multiple means? Because in each one of these categories, you have very specific numbers and they're easy to follow. And then you have multiple and then you jump into double. What, we go from 1.4 to 3.
So the bonds in the assessed value in 2018, 19, and 20 is based on the original town assessed value. And that is the expected growth within that assessed value.
So in
And the 2007 bonds are only due and payable by those taxpayers within the original town limits. So the assessed valuation of the original town when the bonds were issued was right at $1 billion. We're expecting it to be about 1.4 in 2020.
So if I didn't live here in 2007?
So if you were to issue the bonds today and grant approval for the park bonds today, you would not have a tax levy on those park bonds until those projects were completed in 2022. In 2021, there would be a partial year payment that would be made on the new bond. And that's why it says multiple, because the new bond would be at the assessed valuation of the current town limits. The 2007 bond would be at the assessed valuation of the original town limit.
Gotcha.
Makes sense.
Yep.
So I couldn't give you an exact figure there
that
of
makes
what that
sense.
assessed value.
Does-
Very
I
helpful.
mean, I could have broken it up
Yeah.
part and, part, but.
No, but that explanation is very helpful.
And so that 2007 bond will be due and payable, or will be paid off in January of 2022, that last payment. You will have a tax rate
So that
in
rolls off.
2021 for it. It falls off, and that's why we go to the assessed valuation of the current town moving forward for those bonds. And that's why when you look at the rates and you think, how can we issue so much debt but yet have a comparable rate to what we have today? You have debt today that is only being paid for by
That makes total sense.
the original
That
town
makes sense.
limits, and you have debt that is being proposed with an assessed value that is 3 times
that was the
what the
piece that was
original
missing.
bonds were issued
I
at.
think that
That
was
was the
we were
piece that was
Because
missing.
a lot of the numbers up until now did not make sense. Now it makes sense.
And that is why when you look at the 2020 tax rate for the park bonds in the park district, of just over 5.5 cents,
You see that?
you see a comparable rate for those 2022 or for those bonds that are being proposed today for a tax rate in 2022 of 5.3 cents.
So is that difference of the multiplier effect of more homes, more people, more assessed value, where you see the average of the 15 cents being able to be maintained because of that growth?
Correct.
I see.
Correct. And again, you had, when those bonds in 2007 were issued, the town basically used all of its debt capacity at that point in time within the Park District. I should say the Park District used about nearly all of its debt capacity, as would be proposed under these Park District bonds for both 2019 A, B, and C.
Thank you,
I
Tim.
know that's a little confusing.
No, that's very helpful. We got there.
But
Kind of.
are there any other questions as it relates to the Park District before we move on to the proposed street bonds, or street department bond, building bonds?
Probably will be, but keep going.
Okay.
On the obligation, sorry. You've got, for the 2007, the 2% was the 1 point almost 3 million. But in 19, is that would the 2% be 9 million then? I think it's the slide before, or after, maybe the slide after
one?
that.
No, 2%.
It's the very first slide.
Isn't it the 18?
Well, this is the 2% calculation of 1/3
Okay.
of assessed value, which gives your capacity.
So the 2% is the 18.
So under today, you have capacity of $18 million in bonds total. You have outstanding just less than $1.3 million on the 2007 bonds in principal. Utilizing that calculation of the projects for A, B, and C, you would today have remaining capacity of $235 within your general obligation debt.
So we'd go back.
I showed the 2019 pay 2020 since we know those figures of what they've already been certified and what impact that would have on debt capacity. And it shows then that you had additional capacity of $1 million.
And Kevin, just for some clarity on that, this just is what the state says, we can borrow this much money. Doesn't mean we can pay it off. It just means we can borrow that much. Doesn't address how we pay for it.
No, it does. Actually, the state says that they will grant a tax rate to meet that obligation as long as you're issuing debt within that area. And that's why you certify what your debt service levy is expected to be each year at budget time. And then that is how the calculation is then derived by the Department of Local Government
Yeah,
Finance.
but I think the tax caps unfortunately don't give us that much cash availability though.
Actually,
I hope yeah, okay, last time you didn't show us that, I hope you show it this time.
Actually, with debt, it
Great.
does
Show it
provide
to
that.
me.
So, but in 2019, we'd basically max out how much we could borrow for parks. And then fast forward to 2023, we're going to be worth more. So then we would have more room if we needed
You would have more capacity
down the road.
in general
Okay.
obligation debt, yes.
And in theory, worst case scenario, another great recession and AV fell slightly, they would just increase the rate, the state would, to make sure we're able to meet the obligation of the debt that they've allowed us to issue, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's why I also wanted to show you
What happens when you hit the circuit breaker,
that increase in assessed
right?
valuation.
We
debt.
hear about the circuit breaker all the time. If you hit the circuit breaker, you don't collect any more money, even if you're allowed to charge a higher rate, correct?
Yeah, how are we able to charge a higher, I'm sorry, to
Yeah.
interrupt you, I mean, wouldn't we?
And that
be
is the
taking from- wouldn't we-
calculation that you use
Wouldn't we
when
be-
putting together your budget each year. You certify and work into your budget calculation an expected circuit breaker impact based on data and information that is provided from the Department of Local Government Finance, based on data that has been historical on impact of circuit breaker and circuit breaker loss, and you work that into your budget, and that's a part of your budget presentation.
Okay, so in other words, if there's not a plethora of new monies to pay these bonds, you guys, I won't be here, but you guys will just cut expenses everywhere else to make the bond payment. Is that right?
Kind of way.
Because you couldn't.
Actually, it's not expected that your circuit breaker impact will increase next year,
Okay.
based on data that's been provided by DLGF. Largely, that's because you are seeing a 5.76% increase in your assessed value from 2018 to 2019. It's a healthy growth in assessed valuation from 1 year. And that's why they are not anticipating an increase in circuit breaker loss.
So, okay. I'll hold my questions.
Is that based on new growth or the, just the increase in the values of our current homes?
Both.
This-
It's a combination.
Pay more taxes.
Yes,
And
so
it's
we-
not
so we
just,
will be- so we will be
it's
paying
not just
taxes.
homes. It's growth in assessed valuation of commercial property as well as new construction.
So everybody's home values, property values in general are going up by 5.7%, so we can all expect that bill.
No, it's not, no, our values are.
No, I'm not saying
Better
that
be
it's
going
the
down.
assessed valuation
The
is
aggregate of
changing
the town is.
5.76%.
No, the
I'm saying
aggregate, correct. I
The
got it.
aggregate growth in the assessed valuation for the town is 5.76%, just as the aggregate growth for this past year was 3.54%, and the prior year was 6.76%, and the year prior was 4.37%.
Is it common to see that kind of jump from, I was mentioning, I know that 11.78% is due to the reorganizations, but then you go to 4, then 6, then 3, then 5. Is that, that percentage change seems a little bit drastic and almost doubling or reducing?
Well, one, we're seeing growth in assessed values across the state. We're seeing market value growth, and we've seen consistent market value growth across the state. We also seen more construction in Zionsville, Carmel, Westfield, Noblesville, Fishers, and the other surrounding donut communities that have also increased assessed valuations as well.
Thank you.
So let's look at the town debt. And while these proposed bonds are lease appropriation bonds, they are not subject to the general obligation debt capacity. For comparative basis, I wanted to put this slide in there to show you that you also had a separate geo debt capacity for the town. And you have capacity there with the new assessed values of just over $7.7 million in geo debt capacity.
So none of these bonds are looking to issue are general obligation bonds or just the park bonds still?
The park bonds are all proposed to be geo bonds. The town debt is proposed as lease appropriation debt.
Meaning the streets, and what about the $9 million for the sewers and the street building?
That is lease appropriation debt.
And how?
And that's why you have a separate resolution that I think they talked about at the last meeting about they go on different paths.
So this is a
because one
creative
is
way to
lease
circumvent the
appropriation debt and
limitations?
one is general obligation debt.
It seems like a creative way to circumvent the limitations that we have on our debt obligations.
It is used by cities, towns, schools, libraries, townships,
That gives me a lot of confidence.
and the state of Indiana
Yeah, well.
as well. This is how most debt is issued within the state of Indiana, is using lease appropriation debt today. Question, why don't we pay some bonds off first? Well, if you look at those that are highlighted in green, those 4 bonds will be paid off in January of next year. You've already assessed a payment against those in this year's on this year's tax rate, and there is a tax rate in there to collect those revenues and to pay those bonds off. Their original issuance amount was $5.6 million of those bonds that you are going to be paying off here in January of next year. Under the proposed structure as well, that is highlighted in yellow is what you're paying through appropriation, annual appropriation on the lease of the land. That would then be a part of the bond and would be off of your general lease obligation and your general appropriation obligation, and that would free up those $90,000 that you see there that are in that category for the land contract.
In the green, what's the refund? Does that stand for something, or is that?
Those were refunding bonds. At one point in time, they were issued earlier. You refunded them to realize savings.
Oh.
And so the original issuance of the bonds was not in 2009. They were refunded in 2009, 2017, and 2012. You did that to realize savings because interest rates were lower at the time, and you could reduce your annual obligations as a result of those. But I put the refund there because that principal amount is not the original principal amount of the original bonds. This is the proposed debt service. Again, you will see that today the debt that you are paying on for the 2005 and 9, 17, and 12 bonds, those were all originally issued under the original town's jurisdiction. And as a result, the assessed value that those are calculated against is at a lesser dollar amount, as is at the $1.39 billion. The town hall and beyond are all at the current limits of the town's jurisdiction of the $2.7 billion of assessed valuation. And that's why you see that the rates for the 2018 tax year, 2019, are within that 0.7 cents of assessed value, and where we would propose in 2020 and beyond a tax rate of no more than 5.7 cents per hundred of assessed valuation. Why we are able to show you that your tax rate actually would be less with these bonds than what it is currently, because they would be collected by all of the taxpayers of the town of Zionsville, whereas the current debt is not collected by that group. But the tax rate would remain flat. So I bring you back to this slide we showed earlier. The impact on the debt, the town's debt rate as it relates to the total town rate, as well as what we would propose the debt rate to be moving forward. We can't make decisions that you're going to make and the next council will make to determine what the tax rate for the total town will be moving forward, but if you were to approve these bonds, we can estimate what a debt service rate would be, and that debt service rate would be consistent with what the debt service rate is currently and has been since 2015, when each of you last faced election.
And this is on the park bond.
This is total. This includes both the park district as well as the town's general debt levy.
So this includes the other 4 bonds than we are discussing then?
This would
All of it?
include the Park 2019 A, B, and C, as well as the lease appropriation bonds that are being proposed. This would include all of those payments and all of that.
What's the total amount of that new debt?
Pardon me?
Total amount of the new debt the town would be taking on?
Well, the lease debt would be $9.1 million, and the other is 16. The park debt is 16,730.
And so the earlier slide showed current debt's 46 million. There's going to be some of that paid off. What'll be the total debt in 2022?
So when you look at that original pie, that's a total debt. Part of that debt is being paid for by just the original town limits of Zionsville prior to reorganization. So that's why when you say if we were to issue $27 million in new debt, how could we possibly have a consistent tax rate with what we have today? And the difference is that those bonds were issued under an assessed value that today is $1.3 billion. When issued was right around $1 billion. Depending upon what year that the bonds were issued, but it will grow to nearly $3.9 billion of assessed valuation for taxes due and payable in 2020.
3.9 billion?
2.9.
2.9.
I'm sorry, 2.9. Yes, I said 3. 2.9.
Yeah, and most of the questions were not about the tax rate. They were about the cash in, cash out. Where do we, the actual tax dollars are going to use to service the debt in 22? Where are they coming from? The new dollars.
They come from the tax rate that is collected.
Are the folks that weren't in the pre-reorganization that are not getting taxed today, are they not capped at 1%? So will their taxes then go up so that they are then contributing at the $3 billion assessed value?
I believe they are already capped at 1%, but that reallocation of dollars would then change from library, which it will anyway, as that debt. You also have to remember that Union has fire debt outstanding that only Union is paying for today, and that debt expires, I believe, in 2026.
And Josh, the 1.4 million is just the old town outline before the reorg. That's all. It's just referencing that amount. And they're all paying 1%. We've all been moved to that on the
I think you were asking the question of those that are outside of that original town jurisdiction, correct?
And they're at 1% too.
Yeah.
Right, so if we're, I guess, sort of full circle, and I'm not that smart, so apologize, but, you know, if it's still the same pie, but we are now assessing at a higher assessed value at a $3 billion instead of a $1.4 billion, and we're able at the same rate to bring in that money, who are we taking that money from? Are we taking it from ourselves, or are we taking it from other entities that are taxing districts that are within the county?
Good question. So those units, or those individuals and taxpayers, because it's not just individuals, those taxpayers that are outside of the original town jurisdiction would see a change in tax rate from what they are seeing today, because they are not paying a rate on that debt outstanding. So they would
Will
see
their tax bill go up?
No. So what would happen then is there would be a reallocation of those dollars between the taxing units, between this town, the county, the library, and the schools. And again, the schools do not receive general operating expenses through your property taxes. They are only receiving dollars for, in their general obligation, for transportation, bus replacement, and those funds.
Facilities, right? CapEx.
Yes.
So that's where the money is coming
But
from.
their referendum debt is outside of that.
Right.
No, I understand that. But and you're right, Josh, it's got to come from the library, the schools, and maybe the county.
Just to be,
You also would realize that those that are not capped would then have, there would be additional dollars.
Well, that's just, the only people that aren't capped are the commercial
Correct.
properties. That's the only body that's not.
And then you would also show additional revenue coming from the additional assessed valuation that you have consistently seen over the last few years.
Do you have a sense of how much of that is coming from the additional AV and how much of it is the rate changing on the new assessed value? In other words, how much are we taking away from the county, the library, the schools with the issuance of this debt to maintain the rate at roughly 15 cents AV? Look, are we taking $500,000? Are we taking $3 million? Do you have a general sense of what that is?
Today, your circuit breaker loss is right over $600,000
Okay.
for the town. I don't know specifically what the circuit breaker loss is for the other overlapping jurisdictions.
And for non-municipal people, the circuit breaker loss is there's $600,000 of taxes that aren't being paid that technically, based on the tax rate, we're due, but we're never going to see them. Right?
Correct. Your 1% cap, though, is at your gross assessed valuation. You are taxed at net assessed valuation. So that is why what you have seen is that your circuit breaker loss has not changed dramatically over the last few years. You've been around $600,000 in circuit breaker loss for, I believe, the last 2 or 3 years.
Well, let me ask a dumb question. I mean, I've financed hundreds of millions of dollars and have too much sitting on my balance sheet today, too. And at the end of the day, it's like, well, we got to have revenue coming in, and we have a debt service. What we've seen here is $3.6 million, $3.7 million of debt service on the new bonds proposed, right? Is that, if I'm using the numbers right here? And we're paying off some debt, so there's some debt service. I'm not sure how much it was. I've seen too many slides today. But on a net basis, we're going to have X amount of new dollars that we have to come up with from tax collection. So my question is, have you guys run any kind of analysis that shows us, hey, here's your current budget as proposed, which we know is spending more than we take in today, but somehow in 2022, there's going to be even more money there to service this extra debt service?
Well, one, I don't know that you are spending more than you are bringing in today.
Well, we are, but it's proposed in the budget.
Well, I don't believe that that's what you have consistently done. You have saved dollars to make capital expenditures, and when you look at those capital expenditures, as a result, maybe in that 1 year you spent more money than you brought in that year because you saved those dollars for several budget years prior to make that capital expenditure. So I think it's misinformation to say that we're spending more money than we're bringing in on an annual basis.
Okay.
So I think we need to get that information straight so that the
Yeah, it would be
taxpayers
nice.
are
Well, I've
aware
asked
of
for
that.
it 3 times in 3 meetings, so if you can provide that, that would be very helpful.
And what we're showing is that the tax rate would not have a negative impact.
I'm not asking you
As
about
a
the tax
result-
rate. I'm asking about cash in and cash out, because that's how this town pays its bills. It doesn't pay it with tax rate, it pays it with
If
tax
you'd allow me
money.
to finish my statement, as a result, it won't have a negative impact on tax rate. It won't have a negative impact on circuit breaker loss because you will not be increasing your debt rate. As a result, you would not have an additional reliance upon circuit breaker dollars. You have not had any problems in funding your levy, in funding your general obligations, in funding any of your debt service payments. As a result, your bonds have been well received within the marketplace, and you've
You're adding
received
30
very
you're
favorable
upping
tax.
the town debt by 1/3 overnight, I think it has a bigger impact than you're actually telling us.
You're actually growing the assessed valuation that you're
I just asked
assessing that
if there
debt
were more
against.
dollars coming in, and you refused to answer that question.
You have actually
Actual dollars.
and that is where you are seeing that, sir. You are seeing that because you are.
Please show us what the actual increase in dollars are, new dollars in tax dollars. If we're collecting $34 million this coming year, are we going to be collecting
I can't tell you
40
that specifically.
in 2 years to pay this debt?
I can't tell you that specifically until every unit of government has adopted their tax rate and their levy for the next year.
You can't estimate?
I know what has been estimated by the Department of Local Government Finance that has looked at the growth of the assessed valuation, that's looked at the growth in your levy capacity, and they have stated that there is not expected to be an increase in your circuit breaker loss. As a result, you are not going to lose additional dollars, and you would have the capacity to collect these dollars both from the taxpayers that are paying a debt service rate today within your town, as well as those taxpayers within the town that are not paying a debt service rate, but would be paying one moving forward because the current bonds were issued prior to the reorganization. And that relative percentage, that calculation, would not have a negative impact, and you would be able to make both bond obligations as well as your general obligation for day-to-day operations of the town's needs, based on the budget that you approved last year, as well as the budget that you will hopefully approve in a few minutes.
You still didn't answer the question. Very disappointing.
So long and short, even if we get this new bonds, we'll have enough money coming in to pay everything.
That's correct.
Yeah, but he hasn't actually shown us that, because we know that it's going to take more
I think
cash than
I'm not
collected
showing it the way that you want to see it.
That's right. Yeah, I hate to say I'd like to see it on taxes.
And I think
collected
it's
and
because
taxes
I'm
paid
telling
out.
you something that you don't want to hear.
No, I think
and that
you're
is
wrong. I
because
think
the
you're
rates
misleading
will
this
be
community,
collecting.
which it wouldn't be the first time Crow has done that since I've been on this council.
Okay. We are almost 2 hours in. Would it be a good idea to take a 5-minute break? And then we can jump into the first old business, A. So we will reconvene here at 9 o'clock. I need a quick potty break.
Did not answer the question.